Hello, friends. Today we are going to be reading one of my favorite books, The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black. I originally found and started reading this book while I was in high school, and I fell in love with it. So, here we go. Tana woke up in a bathtub. Her legs were drawn up, her cheek pressed against the cold metal of the faucet. A slow drip had soaked the fabric on her shoulder and wetted locks of her hair. The rest of her, including her clothes, was still completely dry, which was kind of a relief. Her neck felt stiff. Her shoulders ached. She looked up dazedly at the ceiling, at the blots of mold grown into harsh patterns. For a moment, she felt completely disoriented. Then she scrambled up onto her knees, skin sliding on the enamel, and pushing aside the shower curtain. The sink was piled with plastic cups, beer bottles, and askew hand towels. Bright, buttery, late summer sunlight streamed in from the small window above the toilet, interrupted only by the swinging shadows by the garland of garlic hung above it. A party. Right. She'd been at a sundown party. Ugh, she said, her fingers on the curtain to steady herself, popping 3 rings off the rod with her weight. Her temples throbbed dully. She remembered getting ready, putting on the jangling bracelets that still chimed together when she moved, and the steel-toed oxblood boots that took forever to lace and were mysteriously no longer on her feet. Remembered the way she lined her foggy blue eyes in shimmering black and kissed her mirror for luck. Everything got a little blurry after that. Levering herself up, Tana stumbled to the faucet and splashed water on her face. Her makeup was smudged, lipstick smeared across her cheek, mascara spread like a stain. The white baby doll dress she'd borrowed out of her mother's closet was ripped at the sleeve. Her black hair was a tangled mess that finger combing didn't do a lot to fix. She looked like a dissipated mime. The truth was, she was pretty sure she'd passed out in the bathroom while avoiding her ex, Aiden. Before that, there had been some playing of a drinking game called The Lady or the Tiger, where you bet on whether a tossed coin would come up heads, lady, or tails, tiger. If you picked wrong, you had to do a shot. After that came a lot of dancing and some more swigs from a bottle of whiskey. Aiden had urged Tana to make out with his new silky-mouthed strawberry-haired girlfriend, the one who was wearing a dog collar she'd found in the mudroom. He said it would be like an eclipse of the sun and the moon in the sky, a marriage of all things dark and light. You mean an eclipse of the sun and the moon in your pants, Tana told him. But he'd been doggedly, infuriatingly persistent. And as the whiskey sang through her blood and sweat licked her skin, a dangerously familiar recklessness filled her. With a face like a wicked cherub, Aiden had always been hard to say no to. Worse, he knew it. Sighing, Tana opened the bathroom door, not even locked, so people could have been coming in and out all night with her right there behind the shower curtain. How humiliating was that? And padded out into the hallway. The smell of spilled beer filled the air, along with something else, something metallic and charnel sweet. The television was on in the other room, and she could hear the low voice of a newscaster as she walked toward the kitchen. Lance's parents didn't care about his having sundown parties at their old farmhouse, so he had one at least every weekend, locking the doors at dusk and keeping them barred until dawn. She'd been to plenty, and the mornings were always full of shouting and showers, boiling coffee, and trying to hack together breakfast from a couple of eggs and scraps of toast. The long lines for the 2 small bathrooms, with people beating on the doors if you took too long. Everyone needed to pee, take a shower, and change clothes. Surely that would have woken her. But she had slept through it, and everyone was already out at a diner. They would be laughing it up, joking about her unconscious in the tub and whatever they'd done in that bathroom while she was asleep. Plus maybe photos. All kinds of stupid stuff that she'd have to hear repeated over and over again when school started. She was just lucky they hadn't marked a mustache on her face. If Pauline had been at the party, none of this would have happened. When they got wasted, they usually curled up underneath the dining table, limbs draped over each other like kittens in a basket. And no boy in the world, not even Aiden, was bold enough to face Pauline's razor tongue. But Pauline was away at a drama camp, and Tana had been bored, so she'd gone to the party alone. The kitchen was empty. Spilled booze and orange soda pooled on the countertops, being soaked up by a smattering of potato chips. Tana was reaching for the coffee pot when, across the black and white linoleum floor, just on the other side of the door frame to the living room, she saw a hand, its fingers outstretched as if in sleep. She relaxed. No one was awake yet. That was all. Maybe she was the first one up. Although, when she thought back to the sun streaking through the bathroom window, it had seemed high in the sky. The longer she gazed at the hand, though, the more she noticed that it seemed oddly pale, the skin around the fingernails bluish. Tana's heart started to thud, her body reacting before her mind caught up. She slowly set the pot back on the counter and forced herself to cross the kitchen floor, step by careful step, until she was over the threshold of the living room. Then she had to force herself not to scream. The tan carpet was stiff and black with stripes of dried blood, spattered like a Jackson Pollock canvas. The walls were streaked with it, handprints smearing the dingy beige surface. And the bodies, dozens of bodies. People she'd seen every day since kindergarten, people whom she'd played tag with and cried over and kissed, were laying at odd angles, their bodies pale and cold, their eyes staring like rows of dolls in a shop window. The hand near Tana's foot belonged to Imogen, a pretty, plump, pink-haired girl who was planning to go to art school next year. Her lips were slightly apart, and her navy anchor print sundress rode up so that her thighs were visible. She appeared to have been caught as she was trying to crawl away, one arm extended and the other gripping the carpet. Oda's, Ilana's, and John's bodies were piled together. They'd just gotten back from summer cheer camp and had started the party off with a series of backflips in the yard just before sunset, as mosquitoes buzzed through the warm breeze. Now dried blood crusted on their clothes like rust, tinting their hair, dotting their skin like freckles. Their eyes were locked open, the pupils gone cloudy. She found Lance on a couch, posing with his arm thrown over the shoulders of a girl on one side and a boy on the other, all three, their throats bearing ragged puncture marks. All three of them with beer bottles resting near their hands, as if they were still at the party, as though their white blue lips were likely to say her name at any moment. Tana felt dizzy. The room seemed to spin. She sank to the blood-covered carpet and sat, the pounding in her head growing louder and louder. On the television, someone was spraying orange cleaner on a granite countertop, while a grinning child ate jam off a slice of bread. One of the windows was open, she noticed, curtain fluttering. The party must have gotten too warm. Everyone sweating in the small house and yearning for the cool breeze just outside. Then, once the window was open, it would have been easy to forget to close it. There was still the garlic, after all, but the holy water on the lintels things like this What? I missed something. Things like this happened in Europe, in places like Belgium, where the streets teemed with vampires and the shops didn't open until after dark. Not here. Not in Tana's town, where there hadn't been a single attack in more than 5 years. And yet, it had happened. A window had been left open to the night, and a vampire had crawled through. She should get her phone and call. Call someone. Not her father. There was no way he would be able to deal with this. Maybe the police? Or a vampire hunter like Hemlock from TV, the huge, bald former wrestler always decked out in leather. He would know what to do. Her little sister had a poster of Hemlock in her locker, right next to pictures of golden-haired Lucian, her favorite Coldtown vampire. Pearl would be so excited if Hemlock came. She could finally get his autograph. Tana started giggling, which was bad, she knew, and put her hands over her mouth to smother the sound. It wasn't okay to laugh in front of dead people. That was like laughing at a funeral. The unblinking eyes of her friends watched her. On the television, the newscaster was predicting scattered showers later in the week. The Nasdaq was down. Tana remembered all over again that Pauline hadn't been at the party, and she was so fiercely, so selfishly glad that she couldn't even feel bad about it. Because Pauline was alive, even though everyone else was dead. From far away in the guest room, someone's phone started to ring. It was playing a teeny remix of Tainted Love. After a while, it stopped. Then 2 phones much closer went off almost at the same time. Their rings combined into a chorus of discordant sound. The news turned to a show about 3 men who lived together in an apartment with a wisecracking skull. The laugh track roared every time the skull spoke. Tana wasn't sure if it was a real show or if she was imagining it. Time slipped by. She gave herself a little lecture. She had to get off the floor and go into the guest room, where jackets were piled up on the bed, and root around until she found her purse and her boots and her car keys. Her cell phone was there too. She'd need that if she was going to call someone. She had to do it right then. No more sitting. It occurred to her that there was a phone closer, shoved into the pocket of one of the corpses, or pressed between cold, dead skin and the lace of a bra. But she couldn't bear the idea of searching bodies. Get up, she told herself. Pushing herself to stand, she started picking her way across the floor, trying to ignore the way the carpet crunched under her bare feet, trying not to think about the smell of decay blooming in the room. She remembered something from her sophomore year social studies class. Her teacher had told them about the famous raid in Corpus Christi when Texas tried to close its Coldtown and drove tanks into it during the day. Every human inside who might have been infected got shot. Even the mayor's daughter was killed. A lot of sleeping vampires were killed too, rooted out of their hiding places and beheaded or exposed to sunlight. When the night fell, the remaining vampires were able to kill the guards at the gate and flee, leaving dozens and dozens of drained and infected people in their wake. Corpus Christi vampires were still a popular target for bounty hunters on television. Every kid had to do a different project for that class. Tana did a diorama with a shoebox and a lot of red poster paint to represent a news article that she'd cut out of the paper. One about 3 vampires on the run from Corpus Christi who'd break into a house, kill everyone, and then rest amongst the corpses until night fell again. Which made her wonder if there could still be a vampire in this house. The vampire who had slaughtered all these people, who'd somehow overlooked her, who'd been too intent on blood and butchery to even open every door to every hall closet or bathroom, who hadn't swept aside a shower curtain. It would murder her now, though, if it heard her moving. Her heart raced, thundering against her rib cage, and every beat felt like a punch in the chest. Stupid, her heart said. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Tana felt lightheaded, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She knew she should sit down again and put her head between her legs. That was what you were supposed to do if you were hyperventilating. But if she sat down, she might never get up. She forced herself to inhale deeply, letting the air out of her lungs as slowly as she could. She wanted to run out the front, race across the lawn, and pound on one of the neighbors' doors until they let her inside. But without her boots, or phone, or keys, she'd be in a lot of trouble if no one was home. Lance's parents' farmhouse was out in the country, and all the land between the house was a state park. There just weren't that many neighbors nearby, and Tana knew that once she walked out the door, no force on earth could make her return. She was torn between the impulse to run and the urge to curl up like a pill bug, close her eyes, tuck her head beneath her arms, and play the game of, since I can't see monsters, monsters can't see me. Neither of those impulses were going to save her. She had to think. Sunlight dappled the living room, filtered through the leaves of trees outside. Late afternoon sun, sure, but still sun. She clung to that. Even if a whole nest of vampires were in the basement, they couldn't come up before nightfall. She should just stick to her plan. Go to the guest room, get her boots and cell phone and car keys, then go outside and have the biggest, most awful freak out of her life. She would allow herself to scream or even faint so long as she did it in her car, far from here, with the windows up and the doors locked. Carefully, she pushed off each of her shining metal bracelets, setting them on the rug so they wouldn't jingle when she moved. This time, as she moved across the room, she was aware of every creak of the floorboards, every ragged breath she took. She imagined fanged mouths in the shadows. She imagined cold hands cracking through the kitchen linoleum, fingernails scratching her ankles as she was dragged down into the dark. It seemed like forever before she made it to the door of the spare room and twisted the knob. Then, despite all her best intentions, she gasped. Aiden was tied to the bed. His wrists and ankles were bound to the posts with bungee cords, and there was silver duct tape over his mouth, but he was alive. For a long moment, all she could do was stare at him. The shock of everything coming over her all at once. Someone had taped garbage bags over the windows, blocking out sunlight, and beside the bed, gagged and in chains, amid the jackets someone had swept to the floor, was another boy, one with hair as black as spilled ink. He looked up at her. His eyes were bright as rubies and just as red. When Tana was 6, vampires were Muppets, endlessly counting, or cartoon villains in black cloaks with red polyester linings. Kids would dress up like vampires on Halloween, wearing plastic teeth that fitted badly over their own and smearing their face with sweet syrup to make mock rivulets of cherry bright blood. That all changed with Casper Morales. There had been plenty of books and films romanticizing vampires over the last century. It was only a matter of time before a vampire started romanticizing himself. Crazy romantic Casper decided that, unlike decades of ancient hidebound vampires, he wouldn't kill his victims. He would seduce them, drink a little blood, and then move on, from city to city. By the time the old vampires caught up with him and ripped him into pieces, he'd already infected hundreds of people. And those new vampires had no idea how to prevent the spread, infected thousands. The first outbreak happened in Casper's birthplace, the smallish city of Springfield, Massachusetts, around the time Tana turned 7. Springfield was only 50 miles away from her house, so it was in the local news before it was national. Initially, it seemed like a journalist's prank. Then there was another outbreak in Chicago, and another in San Francisco, and another in Las Vegas. A girl, caught trying to bite a blackjack dealer, burst into flames as cops dragged her out of the casino into their squad car. A businessman was found holed up in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by gnawed corpses. A child stood at Fisherman's Wharf on a foggy night, reaching up her arms to any adult who offered to help her find her father, just before she sank her teeth into their throats. A burlesque dancer introduced blood play into her act and required audience members to sign waivers before attending her performances. When they left hungry. The military put up barricades around the areas of the cities where the infections broke out. That was the way the first cold towns were founded. Vampirism is an American problem, the BBC declared. But the next outbreak was in Hong Kong, then Yokohama, then Marseille, then Brecht, then Liverpool. After that, it spread across Europe like wildfire. At 10, Tana watched her mother sit at her mirrored vanity and get ready to go to the party of an art buyer intent on lending her gallery a few pieces. She had on a pencil skirt with an emerald-color silk shell top. Her short black hair gelled tightly back. She was fastening on a pair of pearl drop earrings. "Aren't you afraid of the vampires?" Tana had asked, leaning bonelessly against her mother's leg, feeling the scratch of tights against her cheek and inhaling the smell of her mother's perfume. Usually, both of her parents were home before dark. Tana's mother had just laughed, but she came back from the party sick. Cold, they called it, which at first sounded harmless, like the kind of cold that gave you the sniffles and a sore throat. But this was another kind of cold. One where body temperatures dropped, senses spiked, and the craving for blood became almost overwhelming. If one of the people who'd gone cold drank human blood, the infection mutated. It killed the host and then raised them back up, colder than before. Cold through and through, forever and ever. According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, there was only one cure. The victim had to be kept from drinking human blood until the infection was flushed out of their system, which could take up to 88 days. No clinic provided such a service. In the beginning, hospitals had heavily sedated cold patients until a middle-aged and very wealthy woman came out of her medically induced coma to attack a doctor. Some people managed to take the edge off of the cravings with booze or drugs. Nothing worked for others. But if the police found out about a potential case of infection, that person would be quarantined and relocated to a cold town. Tana's mother was terrified. And so, 2 days in, once the shakes had gotten bad enough and the hunger came on, she agreed to be locked up in the only part of the house that would hold her. Tana remembered the screams rising from the basement a week later, screams that went on all day long while her father was at work. And then, all through the night, when her father turned up the television until it drowned out every other sound and drank himself to sleep. In the afternoons after school, between bouts of screaming, Tana's mother would call for her, pleading, begging to be let out, promising to be good, explaining that she was better now, that she wasn't sick anymore. Tana, please. You know I would never hurt you. My beautiful little girl. You know I love you more than anything, more than my own life. Your father, he doesn't understand that I'm better. He doesn't believe me, and I'm frightened of him, Tana. He's going to keep me in prison here forever. He'll never let me out. He's always wanted to control me, always been afraid of how independent I was. Please, Tana, please. It's cold down here, and there are things crawling on me in the dark, and you know how much I hate spiders. You're my baby, my sweet baby, my darling, and I need your help. You're scared, but if you let me out, we'll be together forever, Tana. You, me, and Pearl. We'll go to the park and eat ice cream and feed the squirrels. We'll dig for worms in the garden. We'll be happy again. You'll get the key, won't you? Get the key. Please get the key. Please, Tana, please, get the key. Get the key. Tana would sit near the door of the basement with her fingers in her ears, tears and snot running down her face as she cried and cried and cried. And little Pearl would toddle up, crying too. They cried while they ate their cereal, they cried while they watched cartoons, and cried themselves to sleep at night, huddled together in Tana's little bed. Make her stop, Pearl said, but Tana couldn't. And when their father put on chain mesh gloves, the kind chefs use to open oysters, and big work boots to bring their mother food at night, Pearl and Tana cried hardest of all. They were terrified that he would get sick too. He explained that only a vampire can infect someone, and that their mother was still human, so she couldn't pass on her sickness. He explained that her craving for blood was not so different from how someone with pica might crave chalk, or potting soil, or metal fillings. He explained that everything would be fine, so long as Mom didn't get what she wanted, so long as Tana and Pearl acted normal and didn't tell anyone what was wrong with Mom. Not their teachers, not their friends, not even their grandparents, who wouldn't understand. He sounded calm, reasonable. Then he walked into the other room and downed half a bottle of Jack Daniels, and the screams went on and on. It took 34 days before Tana broke and promised her mom that she'd help her get free. It took 37 days before she managed to steal the ring of keys out of the back pocket of her father's tan Dockers. Once Dad left for work, she unlocked the latches one by one. The basement smelled damp, like mold and minerals. As she started down the creaking wooden stairs, her mother had stopped screaming the moment the door opened. Everything was very quiet as Tana descended. The scratch of her shoes on the wood loud in her ears. Her foot hesitated on the last step, but something knocked her down. Tana remembered the way it felt, the endless burn of teeth on her skin, even though they weren't fully changed. The canines had still bit down like twin thorns, or like the pincers of some enormous spider. There had been the soft pressure of a mouth and pain, and there had been another feeling too, as though everything was going out of her in a rush. She'd fought back, screaming and crying, kicking her chubby little kid legs, and scrambling with the nails of her pink child fingers. All that had done was make her mother squeeze her more tightly, make the flesh of her inner arm tear, make her blood jet like pumps of a water gun. That was 7 years ago. The doctors told her father that the memory would fade, like the big, messy scar on her arm, but neither ever did.